I will, without further ado, introduce you first to the presentation from PepsiCo. This is Duncan McCall, CEO and co-founder of PlaceIQ in the US, and Abby Finnis, the Senior Director for Portfolio Strategy and Analytics for PepsiCo US. Please go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, Duncan McCall here, co-founder and CEO, as you heard, PlaceIQ. So this is a first for me doing a icon presentation with a clear head, not having a late night in a Spanish city with tapas and cigars. So hopefully it will go well, but very pleased to be back here once again. So as you heard, so I'm going to talk around this concept of COVID, location data. How has it been relevant? Has it been relevant? And then I'm going to hand over to Abby, who's actually going to step you through how PepsiCo have been deploying this. And of course, the whole theme here is how can you use location data to understand this change in consumer behavior and make better business decisions? So if you think about this concept, PlaceIQ, we've been around for about 10 years, making sense of movement and behavior from location, opted in, privacy friendly, CCPA, NEI compliant. And you think back to sort of mid to late March, and I'm thinking to myself, wait, we're a company that understands consumer behavior based upon out of home movement. And I'm thinking, boy, in the biggest constraining of out of home movement we've ever seen, is location data still going to be relevant? And of course, it turns out that not only was it relevant, it became even more relevant than probably we anticipated. You've all probably seen some kind of graph like this, and we've been pushing lots of this information out. This, of course, is location data telling the story of what happened during COVID. And of course, what we've seen is we were able to see, segment by segment, how we were able to tell this story. And if you think of the segments that we saw in these behaviors, initially we saw this panic and prepare, everybody going to grocery stores. And what you're looking at here, these lines represent year-over-year change into certain business categories from location data from mobile devices. We saw the next phase, quarantine routine. Everybody now is getting into their routine of quarantine, right? Everything is depressed. And then, of course, the next phase is when we go into what we call this reemergence ramp. It's summer in the US. This green line here is everybody realizing I'm going to be sitting in my garden for the next 2 months. I'm going to go to Home Depot and Lowe's and buy things. So certain sectors really high, certain sectors low. And then, of course, you see the next thing we saw was this kind of summer slump, right? The novelty is worn off and lots of things are depressed, but there's certain routines that are changing. Each one of these phases was different. And then, of course, sadly, the phase we're kind of in now, this fall flats, right? So this was the story of movement and through location data. We all kind of know now, but we could see this day by day, and then we could help businesses make better decisions during this time of unprecedented change. One simple example was this concept of what we think of as trade areas. So we were able to see clients who had locations in the top left that had a trade area that was heavily dependent on people who commuted to work. They were going to be really affected versus in the top right, here's a trade area that actually draws consumers from home, from the same brand of restaurant. So don't invest in the top left, invest in the top right, communicate to those people about pickup and delivery. Another change that we saw, one of my personal favorites, is this next slide shows a year-over-year change in quick service restaurants. And what you can see here is, McDonald's and Whataburger and Sonic, and they all go down during the panic and prepare. People aren't thinking about fast food. And then during quarantine routine, you suddenly see this red line spike up. And this is because in the US, Sonic is a chain that is almost all drive-in. This is a business that was built for COVID. Now we could see this day by day, and we could see this spike, and we could start to say, this particular category of business is doing really well. They should be doubling down. The other brands should be thinking differently. So an example of another change that we could see through location data. This is one we all experience, right? Visitation hours to grocery. People are going less, they're buying more, they're staying longer, they're driving less distance, but of course they're going at different times. Without a commute, you can now see post-COVID in the purple, everybody's shopping during the mornings and the evenings, not just outside of commute, but during the whole day. So if you think of this construct of how has location data from companies like PlaceIQ help clients make better business decisions, more effective deployment of marketing and media. Where should I double down? What categories should I not double down in? How do I think about it regionally during this changing time? In the middle, one of the problems was if you're a large company and you have many distribution outlets, what's happening with demand? Where are people actually going, and what regions? How do I optimize my supply chain, my distribution? And then on the right-hand side, this overall data set of what is happening, we provided this for free to universities and nonprofits, et cetera, to make better decisions. So ultimately, this is a new way to understand consumer behavior in these unprecedented times and allow organizations to make better business decisions off the back of that. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Abby, and I'm going to drive for her, and she's going to step through an example of how Pepsi has taken location data and used it internally.
Great. Thank you, Duncan. For perspective, my team sits at the heart of building a national US consumer narrative for the beverage business at PepsiCo, and also democratizing data solutions to customize the context of what's going on across all of our division teams. So as you can imagine, in March, when we found ourselves facing these three dynamics, right, all trend lines broke overnight. So our finance teams, all of our forecasting and approaches really came under question, which was a great call to action to, when all is lost, go human. And really to have some conviction around reemergence and recovery and understanding of our segments, needing to just tap into, as Duncan was talking about, human behavior. And that's what I like to call a premium on the primitive. So why ask and bother consumers in an environment like that if you can derive or observe information? And also, we need to find a currency for many on my team. So we democratize our data solutions. So we need single data points with dimension. We were in the business of culling and curating for simplicity because we needed to be so timely in the insights we were bringing the organization. And why, you may ask? I think, we all felt this, but it's quite visible on the next slide where we pulled together, this is just an example of one of our retail channels, and a pretty dramatic image. Again, I'm sure we all felt this, but how overnight foot traffic dropped off. This is a year-on-year index charted. So you not only see that steep decline, but you also start to see with the different colored lines that it wasn't happening equally across the board. And this is a retail channel. The same thing happened in gyms. The same thing happened in, outdoor leisure locations. So when we went to connect this very human and accurate, timely indicator with performance of our categories, and we saw humans not being mobile, essentially overnight, not going to gyms, not being physically active. And we also thought, well, we've seen other sources, they're seeking comfort. You put those two together and you very quickly could get out ahead of dynamics such as the COVID-15, right? So we were able to predict and very just primitively pull together a perspective that consumers were probably going to need to revert back to weight management as they realized where their physical activity had left them amidst COVID. So that's just one way we were able to connect, watching consumers not take on their traditional movements and understanding that they were also humanly seeking comfort, and what do those two combine to? On the next slide, we go deeper into this story that it really is impacting different pockets of the US in a very nuanced way. And this was something that became clear early on, but has become more pronounced as the virus has unfortunately made its way around the United States. So the green and blue lines at the bottom are looking at dining and retail traffic in New York. And the orange and yellow lines are just another city, Salt Lake. We were really closely watching a couple cities, both in this foot traffic data, but also other indicators like social and digital scraping. And what we saw going on in New York very much mirrored what we saw here. So at the time where consumers were put into quarantine, we saw interesting dynamics such as, not seeking energy drinks or caffeine as often, but really pursuing nutrition through beverages more. Those almost had a one-to-one trade-off overnight. So just an interesting way to connect what we're seeing go on with foot traffic and social indicators together into a category narrative. And this is a chart that looks at the impact of losing your daily commute. This is looking at one of our convenience and gas retailers' hourly traffic. I'll go quickly, but you see during quarantine, the gray bars, how much of a drop off it is, which really impacted things like a coffee business, which we've been able to help lean into and expedite recovery in. The next two slides we can just flip through briefly, really just showcase how we've democratized and ingested this powerful data across tools within the organization. And I wanted to close by saying that this context narrative of foot traffic speaking to reemergence and just tangible channel visitation has become part of consumer context and messaging up to executives around category outlook. So it's really proven to be a very real-time, agile, and human piece of data as we build a category outlook. So with that, I think we're out of time.